Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Teshuvah Bible Studies. My name is Van and we're doing another Parashah HaShavua. And this is the second part, which is actually the first part of the portion, the second part of our study of our series this week. And we talked about sin in the first part of this series. It's a very important topic, and you probably want to see that video when I'm going to put the link up here, and you can see the video for that. What is sin? It's a very important question, and you may think you know the answer to that, but you might be surprised when you listen to the video how we have difficulty answering that question in a way that is understood, right? So this week we're doing week number 43, and the name of the portion is Va'EtChanan in Hebrew, and it's based on Deuteronomy or Devarim chapter 3 verse 23 all the way to chapter 7 verse 11. We write it like this in Hebrew, and we read the Hebrew from the right to the left. So the Va here means and Hanan means he pleaded. So this is a phrase that means and he pleaded, and of course we're talking about Moses here. This portion begins with Moses's prayer and pleading for him to be able to enter the promised land. And we will see that that petition was denied, right? It was denied, and Moses was not able to enter into the land. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. It comes from the root Hanan. Hanan means to be gracious, or even the verb, as a verb, or grace as a noun, right? One thing that I think is very interesting here, the first time the word grace appeared was when Noah, right, received grace before Elohim, and the word grace backwards is Noah's name. So I thought it was very interesting. It's something that Hebrew is full of those precious gems that we can glean from understanding and learning the language, right? Which is one of the reasons why we are doing Bible studies here using the original language, the holy tongue, right? Lashon Hara. Lashon HaKodesh. Lashon Hara is the opposite, is the evil tongue. So Lashon HaKodesh is the Ivrit, which is Hebrew. And that's one of the things that we do here on our channel. We try to look at the original language and see what we can glean from it. And this study has a lot of that type of analogy using the Hebrew. So I'm very excited about it. And there's a lot of things that I was able to glean from the Hebrew, even in the name of the portion itself. So we're going to explore that later on. So in this portion, Moses is focusing on reminding the people not to commit idolatry when entering the land by avoiding cultural assimilation and spiritual confusion from revelation. The first one would be achieved by avoiding mixture with the nations, right? Elohim was advising the people that when they enter the land, not to mix with the people, because mixing with those people and mixing with their culture would end up leading them to worship false Elohims, false gods. So he was telling them not to do that and not to intermarry with the people of those nations. But there was a reason, right? There's a reason that he wanted to keep his people separate to avoid idolatry, right? And the second one is by not seeking miracles or signs or experience, but to seek his instructions, seek his word, seek him directly, right? So this is based on the experience that they had when they were receiving the 10 Commandments, the Devarim. They had this supernatural experience where they saw the fire in the mountain. They heard Elohim's voice out loud. And then right after that, they built the idol, right? They built the golden calf. And it seems weird that right after they had that experience that they would build a golden calf and commit idolatry. And why did the people do that? Is because they wanted to have that same experience. They were seeking the experience instead of seeking to follow his instructions. And a lot of times we do the same thing, right? We go after experiences. We go to prayer meetings, or we go after people who are healing and different sensationalism concerts and different things like that, because we're hungry for the experience. But instead, we should be hungry for his word. We should be hungry for his instructions. Otherwise, we may fall into the same trap of idolatry, right? And we need to be very careful about that. I picked the key verse in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 10 and 12, that talks a little bit about that. And it's going to also kind of be like an introduction to what we're going to study today. Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, which is the Mount Sinai, when he said to me, assemble the people before me to see my words, so that they may learn to revere me as long as they live in the land, and may teach them to their children. You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, while it blazed with fire to the very heavens, with black clouds and deep darkness. Then the Lord spoke to you from the fire, out of the fire, and you heard the sound, but saw no form. There was only a voice. So here's what I was talking about, this experience that they had, right? But something that, two things that came, that I saw from this verse in Hebrew, is that here we see the word see my words. We, not hear my words, but see. In Hebrew, it actually says you're gonna see my words, and that's one thing we're gonna explore it in this first part. And the other part was that you heard the sound but saw no form, which is what I was talking about, is to keep people from idolatry, right? Elohim could have shown up, he could have appeared as some form, but he was afraid that the people, after seeing that form, whatever form that may be, that they would start worshiping the thing instead of his words, instead of the creator, right? So he could even, maybe he could have shown up even as Yeshua. He could have shown up as a man, right? But he didn't do that. He just spoke his words on purpose, because his first instructions to us is that we should not build idols and we should not worship idols. So that's one of the reasons, that's the main reasons that he didn't appear in a physical form. He just spoke. Now, the interesting thing is that even though he didn't appear in a physical form and he just spoke, the word in Hebrew here is see. In other words, they saw the words, which is kind of, it sounds, it's weird, right? But there are no coincidences. He picks each word specifically, and there's a purpose for that. And once we understand why, we're gonna make the connection. All right, so the lessons from this portion, right? This first part, which is the second part of the series, but the first part of the portion, we're gonna actually talk about one of my favorite verses, one of my favorite verses in all the scriptures, which is the Shema prayer. This portion happens to have the Shema prayer, the prayer that all the Israelites proclaim twice a day. And it's one of the most important prayers for the Israelites, for the people of Elohim. And the Shema prayer is gonna show us how we can see the words, right? That's the connection, see the words. We can see that in the Shema prayer through some of the anomalies in the written word, and we're gonna explore that. Now, and the second part is I wanted to talk a little bit more about what we should plead for or pray for based on what Moses did. What was Moses pleading about? What was he praying about? And what can we learn from that? Okay, so let's go ahead and start that. I always start with the first verse in Hebrew, so to see what I can glean from it in the Hebrew language. And here we have the verse in Hebrew, and below it, the translation is a short one. And it says, and at that time I pleaded with the Lord saying. So at that time I pleaded with Elohim saying, and this is obviously Moses talking. So what was he pleading for? He was pleading to enter the land, but Elohim's response on verse 26 is Rach Lecha. Rach Lecha is an interesting response, right? When we read the response in English, it almost sounds like Elohim is angry at Moses for for begging, angry at Moses for even asking to go into the land. That's the impression that I got. But when I read it in Hebrew, I kind of saw a different vision altogether, right? Rakleha is a word that means that it means it is too much. Elohim was saying to Moses, this is too much for you to bear. This is too much for you to be able to bear entering the land. You can't handle it, right? Because the weight of the sin of Israel and the weight of the sin of the entire world is too much. It's rachleha for anyone. No one was able to bear the sin of the world. So Moses there was actually being taught a lesson. He was actually shown mercy because it was too much for him to bear. He was already advanced in age. And even he says so in this portion. If you read the portion, even he says that this is you guys are too much for me, right? So it was almost like a mercy that, and also there's a deeper message here. There's a deeper lesson here because he says this is too much for you, right? The only one who could bear the sin of the entire world will be the Messiah when he comes. And he also said in verse 28, foreshadowing the Messiah, foreshadowing Yeshua, that it would be Joshua, Yahushua in Hebrew, which actually is the name of Yeshua in Hebrew, right? Yeshua is his name in Aramaic, right? So Yeshua is Aramaic, but his name in Hebrew is Yahushua. So when God, Elohim, told Moses, the one who's going to lead the people into the promised land is Yahushua, he was foreshadowing the coming of Yeshua, because it would be Yeshua that would take us all the way to the promised land. So Moses alone would not be able to take the people all the way, because Moses represented Torah, the written Torah, the written law, right? We even hear people say the law of Moses. There is no law of Moses. The law actually came from Elohim. Moses was just the mouthpiece, was just the prophet. In fact, his Devarim, his 10 commandments, his 10 words were spoken by Elohim himself and written with his own finger. So Moses was just the person who was representing Elohim on earth at that time. So it wasn't his law anyway. But it would not be that written instructions or those laws that would take the people to the promised land, but it would be the living Torah. Yeshua was the living word. He came to fulfill the written word and to live a perfect life so that he could pay for our sin. And it will be his sacrifice and his blood that gives us access to the kingdom. So there was a beautiful picture being painted here when Adonai rejected Moses' petition to enter into the land. There was a deeper message here. Now, there's so many more beautiful connections with the name of this portion in Hebrew, Va'EtChanan, that I'm going to talk about in part 2 of the Bible study. Like I said, this Bible study is going to have a lot of Hebrew and a lot of gematria and a lot of different things, connections that you don't want to miss. It's going to be very beautiful, very interesting things that you would never see in the translations. So don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you can come back and get notified when the second part comes out on Friday. All right, let's go ahead and start on this. We're still on the first part here, and we're gonna now look at the Shema prayer, one of my favorite prayers of all times in Hebrew and the most pronounced prayer, right? And we probably heard it in English when it says, "Hear, O Israel, Adonai your Elohim is one, and that the Lord your God is one." That's how the prayer starts, and then it says, "Love him with all your heart, mind, and soul," and so forth. But the interesting thing about that prayer is in Deuteronomy 6, beginning with chapter 4, is the way it is written. Just to give you a little bit of background so you understand, in Hebrew, there are no capital letters. All letters are the same size. There's no small case and uppercase like we have here. Like we have capital S and small h, right? There's none of that in Hebrew. All the letters in Hebrew are the same size. And there's no small case or uppercase, lowercase and uppercase. But the scribes, the way they're instructed to copy the script has to be exactly as they see it. If you're gonna be a proper scribe, you have to look at the original, and when you're making a copy of a book or a scroll, you have to copy it exactly. And there's what we call anomalies in the way they write those letters. But for us, what we call anomaly, I call it a message that's being conveyed by Elohim. And a lot of people have noticed that the people who study Torah, they examine these anomalies, quote unquote, and start seeing that there is an actual deeper meaning in those anomalies. So the Shema prayer, it's written with 2 enlarged letters. This is how it looks like when it's written in the scrolls. Over here, I have a picture of it. And you can see that all the letters are about the same size, but we have 2 enlarged letters. One in the word Shema. Here is the first word Shema. The ayin is enlarged. And echad, which is the last word in this sentence, which means one in Hebrew, has an enlarged dalet, an enlarged. So this letter and this letter are, as you can see, clearly written bigger than the other ones, and there's a purpose for that, right? So the ayin in the Shema, first of all, let's talk about what Shema means, right? There is no word for obey in biblical Hebrew, so we use Shema. Shema means listen, understand, and practice, which is what a lot of times is translated as obey, right? So it's listen, understand, and practice, Shema. Now that ayin, the symbol, the pictograph for the ayin is an eye. So this is what I'm talking about, how there are clues and hints inside scriptures that helps us see a deeper meaning and understand, right? Just like in that verse that we read in Deuteronomy where Elohim said that you see his word. Now here on the Shema prayer, the most important prayer, the most recited prayer, we have a big ayin in the word Shema. So once again, it's listen, right? Listen, understand, and obey his instructions. But the ayin, which is a symbol of the eye, is enlarged to draw your attention to it. So this is where we can see his words, right? One more time, he's talking about see my words. Very, very interesting. And there's a connection, a deeper, even deeper connection with that. Now, the echad, the last one, means, that word in Hebrew means one, and we have an enlarged dalet. The dalet is a symbol, the pictograph for the dalet, and the name itself of the word of the letter means door. So when we put these 2 enlarged letters together, we're gonna see a very interesting picture. The dalet, as we learned last week, is Yeshua. He is the entrance to the covenant. He says it himself, I am the door. No one comes to the Father except through me. So he's the entrance to the covenant, as we see here. So the dalet is a representation of Yeshua. Now, when you put these 2 letters together, you get the word ad, which means witness. So when we see and understand and follow his word, we become one with the word, and we become witnesses to the word. Very, very, very cool. So what's a witness? What is the witness giving by these 2 testimonies? Remember, we're talking about there's always 2 testimonies, right? So first of all, witness could mean 2 things as well. Like when you see something, like you witness a crime, that's the word applies, but it also means that you are a witness, right? So when you tell people about something you saw or something you experienced, you can be a witness, and you can also witness as in see it, right? You witness. So it's a double meaning as well. But here we can see that there are 2 witnesses, and we're going to see that later in Revelation, where he says that the people in the last days that we're living right now, I believe we are living in the last days, there's going to be witnesses of Elohim, of the Creator, who are both going to be followers of Yeshua, but also people who obey his Torah. So 2 witnesses, because we have 2 witnesses here. The first witness was Moses himself, and Moses represents the written Torah, right? So he was the first witness, and the second witness is Yeshua, who is the Word made flesh. And Yeshua, he's represented here on the Echad, which means one. And he himself said that he is one with the Father, John 10, verse 30. And he also claimed that if you see him, you see the Father in John 14:9. So all these connections, beautiful connections that we could only see in the Hebrew. Now, another interesting thing about Moses is that his name in Hebrew is 1 letter away from the word Messiah, Mashiach. So the Messiah and Moses, they're apart with 1 letter. I didn't put that here, but I just thought of it now. But the difference between the name of Moses in Hebrew and Messiah is 1 letter, a yod, which is God's hands. So again, very, very cool. It's just beautiful, all these connections in Hebrew, right? All right. So these 2 enlarged letters in the Shema prayer show us how the Israelite will become another double witness in the last days. That's what I was talking about. So we see, first of all, that by adding the Dalet to Adonai's name, right? The Yohed Vavhed, this is his holy name, right? When we add the Dalet into that holy name, we get Yehuda, which is the tribe of Judah, where our king is going to come from, right? The Messiah, as we know, is coming from the line of Yehuda. So when we add the Dalet, the door, to Elohim's name, Yohed Vavhed, which a lot of people say Yahweh, Jehovah, they're pronounced differently. But if you add that Dalet into his name, you get Yehuda, right? Which is the lineage for the Messiah, the door, right? And also, when you add ayin to both Yahushua, which is Joshua, and I'm sorry, not add, but like the both words, Yeshua, Yahushua, and Shua, which means salvation, they all have the ayin at the end of them. So we can see this connection one more time. The ad, the testimony, are in all these names in Hebrew. Now, Revelation reminds us that both following Yeshua and Torah, not one or the other, but both of them, are going to be the people who are going to be his witnesses in the last day. I forgot to put the reference here in Revelation, but you could easily Google that later if you want to. Which verse in Revelation talks about followers of Yeshua? Let me actually do that right now. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. So give me a second. I'm going to Google it right now because I think it's important. So it's Revelation 19, verse 19, if you want to read it later. And it talks about how we're going to be his witnesses when we follow Yeshua or believe in Yeshua and his Torah, his instructions or his law. So it's not one or the other, it's both of them. They're complementary. We talked about this last week. Complementary means that they're not opposing each other. If you understand both of them, they add to each other, right? Lastly, we begin to understand that as we enter into the covenant through the door, but not as a thief, right? When Yeshua says, I am the door, those who come in through me will be receiving the kingdom, but those who jump the fence are thieves, right? So when we come in through Yeshua, through the door, we begin to see his words come to life. We begin to see the connection between the promise and the accomplishment, the foreshadow and the real, the prophecy and the fulfillment. We begin to clearly see that Yeshua accomplished all these promises that the Father made in the what we call Old Testament, which I don't like to call it that, but in the Tanakh. And we start to see that both of those are the same covenant, and that we need to Shema this covenant. We need to enter and Shema, right? Listen, learn, and obey. So very, very beautiful. So the purpose of Shema is for us to become witnesses so that the world may see that Adonai is real, that he's true, right? So when we do this, people will see. Only after we enter into the covenant through the door, which I just said, like John 10, verse 7, you can truly see his words We see in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18 that says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, those who are dying. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of Elohim, of the power of God." We can only see that once we enter through the door. Before that, it's foolishness. It makes no sense. It's illogical. But once we enter into that covenant and we receive his spirit, then we can clearly see his word and understand it. As we listen to Torah and learn to understand it and put it into practice, which is literally what Shema means, people are they're going to start to pay attention. People are paying attention to us as we follow these instructions, as we live differently, as we live holy, as we follow these things that no one else is doing, right? People come to me and say, "Why you keep Shabbat even though you're Christian? Why do you follow Yeshua but you want to keep these rules?" When we start living differently and people start seeing the blessings pouring in our lives, or how we react to things, they start paying attention. They start asking questions, right? So Elohim blesses us, or we even act differently in adverse circumstances. So not necessarily, I'm not talking about prosperity here, right? Prosperity gospel. I'm not saying that if you follow these things and then you do all these things that you're going to become rich and you have prosperity. I'm talking about shalom. I'm talking about receiving everything you need, even in times of difficulty. When you're going through a trial, you still have peace. You still act differently. You have a different spirit inside you, right? That's what I'm talking about. And people are paying attention. People are noticing these things. If it hasn't happened yet, once you start doing these things, people are going to start approaching you and saying, what are you doing differently? Why are you doing these things? And I want that too, right? When you live his word and you live his Torah and you follow his instructions, you're going to attract people. People are going to ask. And that's when you become a witness, right? So enter through the door, through the covenant, and then you become a witness. So that's the word ad in Hebrew. You're a witness of the covenant. So with that, I'm gonna end the second part of our series in the first part of this Torah portion with a couple of Bible verses one more time that is specifically talking about how Elohim chose us to be his witnesses, right? Isaiah 43 verse 10 says the following: "You are my witnesses, you are my yad," right? "You are my ad," says Adonai, "my chosen servants, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me there was no Elohim, neither shall there be after me." So it's a privilege, it's an honor to be chosen by Elohim, to be his servants and to be his witness, right? And we have a parallel here, right? Parallels a verse in this portion, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6 and 7, that says the following: "The Elohim, your Adonai, Adonai, your Elohim, has chosen you out of the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession." Adonai did not set his affection on you or choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all people. I thought this was a beautiful verse to end in, because we are chosen not because we're strong. We're not chosen because we're special. We have a special ability. When he looked at me, he didn't say, "Oh, that guy's special, I'm going to choose him." No, he chose us. He chose me and us out of his mercy, out of his love, out of his compassion. He could have picked stronger people. He could have picked better people than me, but he chose me. And because of that, I'm forever grateful, and I want to serve him and be his witness. And he actually chose, in fact, if I really want to be more specific, he actually chose everyone, right? He chooses everyone. Like we said in the first part, Yeshua's blood is sufficient for everyone, but we need to choose him back, right? So he loved the entire world, as we saw in John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only son. He didn't so love the Christians, he didn't so love the Jewish people, he didn't so love Israel only. He loved the world. The difference is those who recognize it, and those who repent, and those who submit to the instructions, right? Those who receive the blessing. That's the difference. So choose him, because he already chose you, but you need to choose him back, right? So with that, I'll end the second part of this series and the first part of this Torah portion. And hope you have a blessed week. And I see you guys on part 3. Shalom, God willing.